Hello everybody, myself Dr. Shekhi Pratima, Ahmednagar Jilla Maratha Vidya Prasarak Samajas, New Arts, Commerce and Science College, Ahmednagar. Supply analysis. This is the fourth chapter. In the last video, we just discussed the concept of the supply, like the individual supply, then market supply, then definition of supply. But in this video, we have discussed the most important law, like the law of supply. This law is most important to your the board exam. So uh, the law of supply, it's the proposed by the Dr. Alfred Marshall Senior. His book's name is The Principles of Economics, published in 1890. The law established a fundamental relationship between the price of a commodity and quantity supplied of that commodity. See, the it's a functional relationship between the price and quantity supplied. This law was introduced by Professor Alfred Marshall, and the Alfred Marshall is a renowned economist. He is also explained one of the most important thing is like the what is the importance about the supply, and then second thing is what is the relationship between the supply and price. So this law will explain the functional relationship between the price and quantity supply. But in this law, we have also discussed the uh, importance for the supply and also the consumer's behavior. See now, the just we have discussed the next point, the statement of this law. Every law means this law is the third law in your the microeconomics topic. See, the first is the diminishing marginality, second is the law of supply, and third one this is the law of demand, and third one it is the law of supply. So first of all, the statement is most important. So the statement is like that the other things being constant, higher the price of a commodity, more is the quantity supplied, and lower the price of a commodity, less is the quantity supplied. Means what? In other words, we know the quantity supplied of a commodity varies directly with the price. Means the supply is related to the price. With a fall in price, supply will contract, and with a rise in the price, supply will expand. Means what? The if price will fall, so that time supply is also falls, and if price will rise, so supply will rise, because we know the every producer's mind is a profit oriented mind. He always seen that where we have increased our profit, and second thing is where we have create the maximum demand for our commodity. So that's why if the price will rise, so he is the available the extra units of that commodity for sale. So it's a functional relationship. So that's why symbolically we express that. You have to see in your screen that the Sx is equal to function of Px. Means we have select the X commodity. You have select any commodity. Okay, in this example, otherwise symbolically relationship will express, and we have select the X commodity. So S is equal to the supply. X means we have selected the X commodity, and F means the function, and P means price of that commodity, means X commodity. So Sx is equal to function of Px means what? It's a functional relationship between the supply and price. Symbolically, this expression will also explain the one of the most important thing is like the supply is depend for that price. Means if it is rises, so supply will rise. If it is falls, so supply will falls. So that's why this law can be better understood with the help of the next schedule, like the law of supply. But the most important the part is like the assumption of the law of supply. Means we have assumed that situation. That situation will explain if it is a possible, otherwise if it is a supportable, so that time the law is applicable, otherwise not. Means the law of supply is a conditional. It is based on the certain assumptions. So these assumptions is the most important. So the first assumption is the constant cost of production. Cost of production means what? The final price means the last price of that commodity, and cost of production, these two things is different. So the law will hold true only if the cost of production remains constant. Means it is assumed that there is no change in the cost of production. If it is a change, means a change in cost of production will affect the profits of the seller. So therefore, the less quantity will be supplied at the same price. So that's why we assume that the supply means the constant, the cost of production, it's a constant. So this is the first assumption to the law of supply. Then second assumption is like the constant technique of production. You know, the what is the importance about that technique in the production side? If the producer had changed the technique, otherwise the technological changes, if they are adopted, otherwise accepted, so that time the supply is changed, that time price is changed. It is also assumed that the technique of production does not change, because the improved the technique of production, otherwise the producer has accept the modern technology, otherwise the technological knowledge, so that time it leads to an increase in the production. So this is the turn may be lead to and the increase in the supply at the same price. Means on that time, the same price, the supply will also rise, but it is not supportable to the law of supply. So that's why in this law we'll assume that the technological changes, otherwise the technique of production, it's a constant. The next is no change in weather condition. See now, the if the weather condition it changes sometime, the natural the calamities like the flood, earthquake, if it is this condition is there, so that time it's decreases the supply. So it is assumed that there is no change in the weather condition. Then next is the no change in the governmental policy. So governmental policy, like it's related to the trade policy, also the taxation policy, otherwise the governmental expenditure policies. So we assume that means this law is assumed that the government policies like the taxation policy, trade policy, etc. remains unchanged. Why? Because if the taxes will fall, so that time the at the same time same price the supply will rise, so it's not accordable to this law. So that's why this law is assumed that no change in government policy. The next is the no change in the transport cost. See, the transport cost is included to that the last price of that commodity, but we know if it is a constant, so that time price is also constant. So there is no change in the condition of the transport facilities and transport cost. For example, the better transport facility increases the supply at the same price. Means if the transport facility is available, easily available, and it's a cheaper, so that time that part will increase the supply at the same price. Means we never consider the price is false or rises. So this is not supportable for that law. So that's why this law is assumed that the no change in the transport cost. Then next assumption is like the prices of other goods remains constant. Which other goods? See now, it's as we assume that the other goods prices remains constant. If it is changed, so the law of supply may be not hold true, because the producers may transfer resources to the other products. Means what? The factors of production will change, otherwise transferred to the another production side. Means it's not accountable to this law. Means that production the producer will stop and he has accepted to the next production side, because the factors of production, it is a transferable and he is easily transferred, because those commodities price is rise in future, otherwise it is a support to that the producer to increase our profit. So that's why this assumption is not supportable for this law. So that's why we assume that the no future expectation. So this is the totally the assumptions of this law. Means this assumption, if it is supportable, so that time law is applicable. So let's discuss the next point, the um, supply schedule. And the one of the most important part is like the diagram, otherwise the graphical representation of the law of supply. This is the most important to your board exam, because every time the if the board will ask that question, explain the law of supply in detail. See now the schedule and graphical representation, and also first the introductory part. Means the 8, if the question is the 8 marks, so this the schedule and graphical representation has collected 3 marks near about. So that's why this the schedule and graphical representation is most important. So I request to all students, please, the every time you have to focus the graphical representation and also the supply schedule. This is the most important. Okay. So let's discuss the next point, the supply schedule. See now, in this table, the first column, we have discussed the price of the commodity X. Means we have selected the X commodity in rupees. Okay, in rupees. Then next column, the supply of commodity X in kilograms. Okay, so this schedule will explain that it's a direct relationship between the price and quantity of a commodity. Direct relationship means what? If the price will rise, so that time supply will rise, and if price will fall, so that time supply will falls. So when price rises from rupees 10 to rupees 20, so that time is the 10, 20 and 30. So that time the supply will also rises from the 100 kilograms, 200 kilograms and 300 kilograms. It's a respectively. So it means that the price rises, so supply also rises. And when the price falls, so supply also falls. So there is the direct relationship between the price and quantity supplied, which is shown that table, otherwise that schedule. Then the next is we have represent the graph. The graphical representation is most important to the every law. I am talking about the every law, otherwise the every theorem. See, this is the third theorem, otherwise the third law we have discussed in the microeconomics. The first is the diminishing marginal utility, second is the law of demand, and third one most important is like the law of supply. So that's why the graphical representation is most important. So we have the convert that schedule in the graph. So the OX axis represent, otherwise measures the quantity supplied, and OY axis measures or the represent the price of a commodity in rupees. See, the SS is the supply curve, means that supply curve slopes is upward from left to right. See, I repeat that sentence. The supply curve is like the SS, and where the supply curve slope is. See, the SS supply curve slopes upwards from left to right, which has a positive slope. This is the positive slope. It indicates the direct relationship between the price and quantity supplied. See, we have explained these all things. See, the first price is 10 rupees, so that 10 rupees per unit of that commodity. So that time the producer will supply the 100 kilograms of that quantity. Then next is the 20 rupees if price will rise. So that time supply is also rise in the 200 kilograms. And last is the highest price. It's like the 50. And on that time, the quantity supplied will rise in 500 kilograms. So that is the graphical representation. But this graphical representation is also seen that when price rises, supply also rises, and when price falls, so supply also falls. See, I will repeat that sentence. The supply curve, see, where the slope of that supply curve, SS is the supply curve, whose slope is left to right, upward, not a downward. See, in the demand curve, that demand curve slope is left to right downward, but in the supply curve slope is always, I'm talking about always left to right, upward, and it is a positive slope. So in a one video, otherwise the one lecture, we have never completed the total law of supply. Okay, so the last point is like the exceptions to the law of supply. The next video we have discussed the exceptions to the law of supply. Okay, I think you have understood these all points, these law. So goodbye everybody, stay home, stay safe, goodbye.